Mishmash! Kitbashed Corner!
Hey, today we're doing a sequel of sorts to my favorite Marines Kitbash series. That's pretty much all it is, really. It's just me kitbashing Marines that I happen to like a lot. No rhyme or reason, no connection via successors, they're just chapters that I happen to really like. And today I have two for you, the Exorcists and the Emperor's Spears. Originally I was gonna do 3, but I just didn't have enough time, and I kinda went a little bit more elaborate with these two figures. But that just means there's more on the back burner for future episodes. But before we get into it, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I really want to get to 20,000 by the end of this year. And if you really dig it, consider becoming a channel member. For $3 a month, you get to see my videos early, and for $5, you get a weekly Q&A exclusive to the Mashest tier. Along with this, you get special perks in the Mishmash Discord, and you get to send in your dudes for me to review. I just want to say a huge thank you to my channel members. You guys are amazing. And additionally, if you're into Wargames Atlantic products, especially Quar, you can use my affiliate link down below. It doesn't cost you anything, and it really helps me out. But that's enough of the promotional stuff. Let's get into the kit bashing. Now, the Emperor's Spears are definitely one of my favorite chapters, mostly because of their design philosophy. I really like the light blue and the white helmets. I've always been a fan of this color combination. And the more Celtic designs are definitely something that draws me in. Now, this point is something I'll get into later on, but I've always liked the Emperor's Spears because they've always kind of felt like Space Wolves, but without the more Nordic elements to them. I've always wanted to like Space Wolves, but there's something about them that I just don't jive with. But beyond the comparison to Space Wolves, they really do have their own thing going for them. And the unique usage of spears themselves as power weapons is something I've always liked about them. With all these elements combined, that's exactly what I want to go for this figure. But going back with the Space Wolf comparison, I'm actually going to be building this guy off of a Space Wolf Primaris Lieutenant. Speaking of which, let's get into it. So the first thing I want to do with this figure is remove the more Space Wolfy elements. And I'm starting by slicing off the Aquila on the main part of the power armor. Unfortunately, my camera angle was a little messed up as I actually kind of renovated my hobby area recently. But it's a pretty self-explanatory process. I'm using a flat blade on my X-Acto knife to kind of glide along, and I'm sanding it down in accordance to what I've sliced off. I wanted to make things look flat in order to kind of give myself the freedom to add on to this part if I wanted to later on. And at this point, I decided to slice off the little wolf tail. It does look a little bit more Space Wolfy. I'm sure it would look fine if it was still on, but I prefer it without it. I'd also make sure to leave little remnants of actual tattered fur just so it didn't look like there was a bald spot there. But after doing so, I would begin slicing down other bits from the main portion of the armor, this being the wolf skull and some of the little charms on the belt guard or whatever you want to call this thing. And I wanted to be careful during this process. At first I was using my flat blade, which worked fine initially, but I ended up actually switching my X-Acto blade to a more traditional style. This allowed me a little bit more room and a little bit more dexterity in terms of slicing off bits. I had to be careful too. I didn't want to cut too deep and make some scarring that I couldn't really easily get rid of. It wouldn't be too difficult to patch up, but if I can avoid going back and doing more extra shit, it's nice to just do it in one go. And in between cuts, I would also sand things down just to leave a little bit more of a flat surface. I was considering just adding a decal over that area, but that felt kind of cheap for a lieutenant character, so I felt that I did need to put something there. But I wasn't quite sure what that was yet. Thankfully, the little fur tuft area was pretty easy to just cover up. I ended up using one of the little Space Marine charms. I suppose using a bolter round is more akin to a character that is more of a marksman, but it still fits, it still looks cool. That, and even though I snip things rather aggressively on the fur tuft area, it still looks natural because it's a fur pattern. You can really get away with being messy in these kinds of areas. And after doing so, to move on to his weapon, I decided to snip away at the power axe. I wanted to be careful while doing this because I think it would be kind of fun to use later on, but I have to make a power spear. As you can see, being very diligent to also sand things down, I'm using a very low grit, just to make sure that I have a good surface to adhere to, but I also don't want to mess up the hand. Now, I can't quite remember if this figure is built with the pauldrons attached. but I ended up clipping away at both the main pauldrons that came with the figure. Kind of embarrassing, I actually have had this figure since he debuted, so he's kind of been sitting in my bits box for a while. And on the gauntlets, I actually kind of feel bad because they do look cool, but I ended up slicing away at the little wolf skulls on the side, and I would sand them down with, again, a low grit sander. I really wanted to be careful. I was kind of considering adding stuff onto it. One of them I ended up actually going a little too hard with the slicing, so I ended up attaching a purity seal, but I'll get to that later on. For the pauldrons, I just used some from the Veteran Sternguard set, and I think these pauldrons look pretty damn cool. And to add on some little extra flair, I added some purity seals. When I don't know what else to add, I gotta add some purity seals. Just like right here, like I mentioned previously. I'm not even gonna pretend that this isn't like a band-aid of sorts to kind of cover up an ugly spot, but I like having some older purity seals on my Space Marines just to kind of mix and match things. I think it just looks cool. Now coming back to his weapon, I'm slicing up a warp staff from the Grey Knights kit. Again, for this process, I'm being very diligent not to go hog wild and just slicing like a madman. I really want to be careful to make this fit and adhere nicely to the Primaris arm. And, I don't know man, I've had my gripes with Primaris, but one of the nice upsides is a lot of the older weapons look a lot better in the hands of Primaris. In a literal sense, not in the, oh, they look better on Primaris, they just fit better in their hands for kitbashing. But for the upper portion of his spear, we're going to use the upper portion of the Force Staff. Except this time, I'm going to be clipping off the little icon at the top. I also want to be careful doing this because this looks like kind of a fun bit that I could use down the line. I'm sure I'll have a use for it later on. I think that's one of my favorite parts of the kitbashing videos. I always end up using little extra bits and clipping them away, and the remnants of those bits end up popping up in future videos. Now, after it was nice and sanded down, it fit really nicely in his hands. But at this point, I needed a head for the spear, and I found it pretty quickly. In an ironic twist, I ended up using a warp staff, and this was from the Rubric Marine set. The lower portion of the staff literally has a spearhead attached to it, so how can I not use this? That and it was absurdly easy to cut off, so it was just a matter of sanding it down and just simply attaching it on, and bingo. You know, I will say though, initially I wasn't exactly sure with the spearhead being at the size that it was, it felt a little shrimpy in comparison to a Space Marine. But I think in a lot of ways I like this better. There's a lot of conversions I've seen for Emperor Spears where they end up using Eldar Spears, and sure it looks cool, but it just doesn't look right to me. That, and I don't want to just make another Grey Knight's Halberd. I really wanted to make something unique here. And it's kind of weird to me that so much art depicting the Emperor's Spears, they always have power swords for some reason. Anyway, I'm rambling. For his melon, I decided to use a Deathwatch head, and I wanted to use this one because it kind of had a similar face guard to more Celtic-like helmets. And to add on to it, I would use the crest from an old Ultramarines upgrade helm. I know traditionally they have more of a mohawk rather than the horizontal crest, but it looks cool. It fit rather seamlessly, the slice I made was rather clean, so just using a little bit of Tamiya was all I needed to do. That and simply just guiding it in place using my X-Acto knife. After it was in place, I decided to take this Legion icon from the Mark 6 Corvus set, and I would slice off the skull. Well, the front of the skull. I decided that I wanted this to replace the lack of anything on the belt guard. This time I used a little bit of a thicker Tamiya along with just a little bit of sprue goo to really weld it onto the front plate. A big part of this was guiding it in place to make sure it actually stayed nicely on the belt guard, and I really wanted to be careful to make it look a little bit more symmetrical. I think at the end of the day I did get it a little off kilter, but I don't think people are really going to notice it. They probably will now that I've yapped about it, but shut up. And along with a finishing little bit to add onto the figure, I decided to add on this little crest from, I believe, the old Company Hero set. It's just a nice little decoration for the top of his backpack. But as one last little step, I decided that I really wanted to go all in with the fur pattern on the figure. To do so, I used a little bit of green stuff, and I molded along the back of his helmet in kind of a neck pillow fashion, and I would just do my typical little slicing with my hobby knife. Basically, you just kind of want to feather this in and create kind of an unnatural pattern. And in a way, it is natural. You just have to keep adding on to it. And one thing that I would suggest is before doing this, I would either want to have more green stuff packed in and then add another layer and do basically the same thing I'm doing here, or just add a lot more green stuff than you think you'll want, because when it comes down to it, if there isn't enough density to the green stuff itself, it easily peels off, like you can see here. It's definitely one of those processes that it is really easy to do, but it is really easy to mess up. And I ended up going back a couple of times, and when it comes down to it, I really should have done this maybe before I put the helmet in place. But at the same time, that's kind of how we do things here. I don't really plan ahead for my figures. I just kind of have a basic idea, and then I kind of go with it. And I decided to kind of go a little bit deeper with it, and I decided to cover the entirety of the chest with the fur pattern. Part of me kind of wishes I left a little bit of area exposed, just so I could paint on a little bit more. But, you know, I could always just remove it. It wouldn't be that hard to just peel it away. But that really comes down to whether or not I decide to prime this miniature before the video ends, which I probably will. But at the end of the day, I really do like how it looks, and I do have to say this as well, it's actually really fun to do this. It's kind of one of those things where it's like shading, where you kind of have to be careful on how long you do it, because it's really easy to get carried away with it. But once I was happy with the green stuff placement and it adhered, I was really happy with this figure. You know, it's funny, this has been a figure I've been planning for several months now, actually. This actually sprang up from a conversation I had with Red and Aaron from Astartes Anonymous. We were just kind of shooting the shit about random Space Marine chapters one day, and Red sent me an image of Captain Brack. Seeing a Space Marine chapter that wasn't the Space Wolves having pelts on their armor was something I wasn't used to, and I instantaneously knew I finally had a use for this figure. No disrespect to him, I'm just not much of a Space Wolves enjoyer, you know? But hey, I digress. I've been thinking about building this guy for months, and I'm really happy that I finally did it. Now, our next chapter we're going to be talking about is, of course, the Exorcists. I've always had a big draw to these guys, mostly because they look like loyalist word bearers. And they definitely live up to their name. They're basically demon purgers. Well, beyond the Grey Knights. But these guys always kind of gave me sort of a Hellboy vibe. Obviously, their color scheme is different from word bearers, but it is interesting to see a chapter that resembles them being demon purgers. My first introduction to these guys was the Ashen War, and I really found it interesting, the little team-up they had with the Dark Hands, and the fact that they were able to kill a demon prince. They're just one of those chapters that holds this cool, mysterious vibe without feeling edgy or overbearing. They're just kind of badass dudes. And with that in mind, that's exactly what I planned on doing for this guy. At first I decided that I wanted to do a Terminator, but then I decided to use one of my push-fit miniatures. I really like the pose on this guy, but I did need to get rid of this pauldron. It is kind of ironic considering I do use a regular pauldron at the end of this video, but I wanted to snip this one out of the way so I could glue the arm on a little bit better. The arms I planned on using were from the Librarian kit. If you remember, I actually kitbashed this guy into a friend's character, so I had the leftover bits and now I actually have a reason for him. The first thing I did want to do, though, is snip away at the Force Sword and snip away at the little cables. I want to be careful with this too, because it would be really nice to reuse these. After doing so, I wanted to slice things down and make sure it had a very clean surface. I didn't want any little bumpy edges or anything like that. And I wanted to make sure that the sword itself would allow for another blade. After doing so, I'd glue that bitch on. Again, I probably could have just cut the peg out and fit it into the pauldron, but I feel like it was a lot less work to just snip the whole thing off. Plus, there's no reason I can't use the bits. Now for his other arm, I'm using, well, the other Librarian arm. Now one thing I do want to mention is the reason I'm using these is the Exorcist symbol is basically the Librarian symbol. It seems pretty perfect, although the first thing I do want to do with the other hand is I'm going to slice these fingers off because I have an upgrade hand I want to put in place. This was a bit of a diligent process. I really wanted to slice things down and make sure I had clean bits, but over time I would realize I'd have to snip away at more of the hand. Here I'm just kind of clipping away at the base, and I'm really trying my best to kind of not go all out and just destroy this thing. I really was a little bit more diligent in some ways than I probably should have been, but it is what it is. At one point I just decided, okay, let's snip the whole goddamn hand off. But if you notice, I kept the little brass knuckles. And after doing so, I made sure to clean up the rest of the arm so a new hand could be put in place. Now ironically, the hand that I'm using comes from the Grey Knights kit. I kinda mentioned them earlier. This, of course, being a severed demonette melon. Now one thing I will mention as well, like I did with the previous miniature, is the firstborn hands are always a little bit smaller than the newer ones. On the other side of the coin, with the Force Spear, the Primaris hand worked better, but here it looks a little smaller in comparison to his other hand. What I planned on doing, however, is using those knuckles. I'm sanding them down here as I do want to attach them to the firstborn hands to kind of give them a uniformity as well as bulk them up a little bit. I may have gone overboard with this process, and it was probably more tedious than it needed to be, but after using some sprue goo and fitting it in place, I think it was worth it, and I think it does really add a lot to the hand overall. And I can't help but feel like it really does give him a unique look overall. It doesn't feel out of place, it doesn't feel too clunky. Especially once the model is primed, it looks fantastic in my opinion. But after doing so, I would have placed the Librarian Pauldron, and voila, looks identical to the Exorcist symbol. All the more reason why I think this is such a good kit bash. Although in some ways, I'll mention this later on, I did sort of put the upgrade bits and kit bashing elements in places that aren't necessarily noticeable right away. I'll get into it later. Coming back to his sword, I decided to replace the blade using one of the Mark VI Corvus swords. As cool as the Force blade is, I don't think it works particularly well if I'm using a miniature that isn't a librarian. Plus, just having the blade around for future kit bashes will be nice. I really am happy with how the sword's settled though, it's kind of a perfect fit. Now moving on, I'm using the banner from the Sternguard kit and I'm slicing the skull face off. Again, kind of doing what I did earlier. But to replace this, I'm gluing on a Nurgle head from one of the Plaguebearer kits. This is kind of a little effigy of chaos. Kind of a little way of saying, yeah, we're coming for you. I thought it was a little too chaotic at first, but I think it fits really nicely. It feels kind of similar to their old design from the Rogue Trader days. At first I wasn't sure how to feel about this, but I'm pretty happy with it. It's definitely different, and speaking of heads, I forgot to film this part, but I used an old Reaver melon. Felt the skull mask was fitting for the Exorcists. But at the end of the day, I'm really happy with this guy. I will say though, something I mentioned previously is the one thing I do regret about him is almost everything I kit bashed onto him is not entirely obvious unless you're looking at him from the side. Although at the same time, I do have to remember that this will be more obvious once he's actually painted. I do think kit bashes look better when you instantly know what the chapter is, but I don't know, maybe I'm being too hard on myself. But when it comes down to it, I'm still really happy with the posing, so I really can't complain too much. But hey, if you liked it, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, share with a friend, and remember to mishmash, kit bash, and paint some fantastic miniatures. And you're gonna. I promise. See ya.